Hello and welcome to First Contact, the world's first podcast where we openly discuss all things relating to humanity's preparation for open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm your host, Eesha Patel. If you are loving this content, please be sure to join us in the First Contact Facebook community and let us know what you think. Let's dive into another exciting episode of First Contact. Hello and welcome to today's episode of First Contact. On today's episode, we have somebody that I'm very, very excited to speak with. His name is Jim Penniston. Now, Jim, some of you may know, is part of one of the most famous cases in the entire extraterrestrial ufology sort of space, which is the Rendlesham Enigma. So today we actually get to speak with Jim, the man himself. He has a number of books that he's participated in getting out there into the world about his story. His experience happened while working for the US military. So it's a very high quality case. So we're really excited to get into the details of that. So Jim, welcome to the show and please introduce yourself. And we're really excited that you're joining us here today.
Thank you, Eesha. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm retired Air Force, which is different than just being in the military. I served 21 years. One of the more important things about the case itself is that prior to that assignment, I had been at Offutt Air Force Base, which is the head of the Strategic Air Command, and it's an underground facility. It handles all kinds of stuff. It's defunct now. It's named something else. And anyway, I had the opportunity when I was there to get my top secret clearance. I got to, we were bodyguards and security for the command post there and for the 36 generals that were assigned. And so that is part of the stuff that hasn't been out about Rendlesham, really, my background with that. And during the course of that, though, there was a lot of, we provided security for a lot of research and development meetings with NATO and STATO and all those things. And during those times, some of them were just technology ones talking about future technology. And so anything that was at those briefings cannot be replicated today. I mean, or with Rendlesham cannot be replicated, okay? The stuff they were looking at is probably about 40 to 50 years in the future. That's the stuff they were looking at to do. And so I had that background there too. So I knew what we had in the planning board. And I knew what was in development at the time. Of course, all that stuff was top secret at the time. So anyway, I got the assignment to Bentwaters in July of 1980. I was only there about 6 months prior to the incident. I was a security flight sergeant. That night I was working as the flight chief for Woodbridge Air Force Base. And a little background about the bases maybe. They're RAF Bentwaters, Woodbridge are separated geographically by about 3 miles. They're a dual base. They say RAF, but they belonged to us at the time. We leased them. And but we had to have RAF commander on the base. That was part of the agreement we had with the Brits. And we had probably on the base with civilians and military personnel around 10,000 people. So it was a pretty large base. Matter of fact, it was the largest tactical fighter wing in the Air Force at the time. So going back to that night, I was the flight sergeant. I was working with, I think, about 14 other guys, maybe 15. I got to be so careful when I give a number out. People say, well, it was 12 or it was 16. I'm just, I can't remember exactly. I think it was about 16.
I think in your book it says 14, if we're going to keep the facts straight. In your book it says 14, if we're going to stick to the facts.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what. Gary Osborne, he checked every fact out with me, everyone. And what made it, it's that way that I can be consistent. I'll tell you what I told Gary. I said, he says, why do you just make up a number like that? I said, I don't care about them. I said, they're not important. I said, not after what happened. I said, that's the last thing that's important is whether it's 14 or 15 or 16 people out there.
Yeah.
And so he keeps me straight, okay, as far as the actual numbers. And just to give you some background, I'm just not going by memory on this stuff. When I was in the Air Force, I kept journals, daily journals, everything that happened for 20 years, okay? I got it all written down. And part of that was my assignment at Bellwaters from 1980 through 1984. I had, the 4 years there, so I have all that written down in my journals. A lot of it entailed meetings, aftermath stuff, things like that. So that was key when I was writing the book. It was like having an instant memory. Once you read, a bit of my journal, you go, oh yeah, I remember that, and you can, expand on it. Then, where was I at? I got off track. Sorry.
Well, before we get into the actual crux of what happened, I just want to go back to, you mentioned something about stuff that happened 40, 50 years ahead of time. Can you just clarify what you meant by that?
Well, I'm talking about the research and development the Air Force was doing. They were projecting 40 and 50 years ahead, for the stuff.
At the time that you were working there?
Well, when I was working at Offutt, when I got to, I got to Bellwaters, Woodbridge, there's no need for me to be around that kind of stuff. I mean, I was doing security for the base. One of the, if we get into the code, there's something in there about predicting the future. Okay, so we can talk about that.
I want to get to that before. Yeah, I want to get to that definitely. The code is probably the most exciting part that I'm most interested in. But let's go into the story. People don't know.
I'll tell you, the Rendlesham Forest incident is not about any individual, none, because none of us are important. What it's about is only that code. That's how important that code is.
I am fully aware of this, yes, and I feel the significance of that. Yeah, I'm very, very aware of this. Let's give people just a really brief overview of what actually happened. Just for people who haven't read your book does go into quite a lot of detail in the Rendlesham Enigma. And for anyone who does want to actually get all the facts and wants to go down that rabbit hole, they can read the book. It's 680 pages long. There's a lot there. If you just give us a little bit of a brief overview as to just what happened in the forest that night, and then we can move into the code, which I know is definitely the most important part about this.
I got dispatched about midnight from the chow hall to go to the east gate. It was on the far side of the base. A couple law enforcement patrolmen had requested that I go out there. I was sent there by security control. I arrived. I talked to the senior patrolman, Bud Steffens. I said, "What's going on, Bud?" He says, he points over to the Capel Green area of Rendlesham Forest, and he says, "There." And I could see what looked like a lighted dome over the forest canopy, and looked like a fire of some sort within the forest. And so my first thought is, and at that time, I think I'd been to maybe 25, 26 aircraft crashes. My first thought is an aircraft crash. So I said, "Bud, did you see it go down?" Or he says, "Did you see it crash?" And he goes, "No, Jim, that didn't crash." He said, "It landed." I'm thinking, well, that's impossible because the forest is just too small. I mean, these are pre-planted trees that they put out there. They're only about 5-6 feet across. There's nothing can land in there. So that was perplexing from the start. So there was multiple colors. I don't know. It sort of looked like an aircraft crash. So anyway, I go to the direct line, talk to Central Security Control. I got like 5 or 6 people on there at the same time. All this is happening in seconds. I was given permission through the command post by the base commander, Colonel Conrad, to go ahead and go off base with 2 other, with a small team. And we were ordered to leave our weapons there because, well, first of all, you don't need them for aircraft crash. And second, we had the status of forces agreement with the Brits. and it had, you couldn't even go off base unless it was an emergency. So the emergency situation existed because we thought it was a downed aircraft, okay? And so we started running our security response options, our checklist. I did anyway, along with Central Security Control. We deployed off base, went as far as we could. They had cuttings. The Forest Service had cut a lot down, so there was a lot of berms in that. And I couldn't get the Jeep. I was afraid I was going to tip it over. So we stopped. I figured, well, if the Jeep can only make that far, this is a good place for the entry control point. So I put Airman Kabanzak there, and I said, okay, he had the other radio. I says, okay, you're going to be here for the entry control point. I'll call you in for responding forces. We were looking for mortuary, fire department, those kind of people. And anyway, as I got close to the forest, there's a lot of particulars. I'm going to do this in brevity. I'm not going to tell you how I felt, what I seen, or what really I heard, but or all the particulars of it. But anyway, there was a very bright white light within the forest. There was no longer colors or nothing like that from it. And I entered the forest. I had the other airman 50 feet or so behind me, the other airman about 25 feet this way. And as I came over the berm, there was a flash of light. And so I hit the ground. It was instinctive. I thought it was an explosion or something, but there's no sound. So after that happened, I get up and I can see a dissipating light going down. And what I see forming is a triangular craft. And finally, the bright light dissipated. And all I could see is with movement of globular color running through the craft. And eventually that slowed down and just became opaque. All right. I had taken pictures up to that point. I had ran out of film. Oh, we used film back then, by the way. 35 millimeter. I used all I had. I was carrying it for, take pictures of classified and stuff like that, or the aircraft site. Anyway, I was in constant. I was in contact with the radio through my control center. I was telling them everything that was happening, but I wasn't receiving anything. And I asked Kabanzak if he could hear him. He said yes, he could. So I knew I was getting through. So I kept my security checks up. I didn't have anything out to measure and to do anything like that out there with the craft. At that point, though, I terminated the security response option for a downed aircraft and initiated a helping hand security response option. A helping hand is a possible hostile threat that could influence the war-making capability of the base. Okay, so I initiated that response option. I didn't know what the hell it was. So I started to do my investigation on it. I had a lot of mixed feelings about it. They went from everything from fear to being in awe to just perplexed. And I did a 360 walk around of the craft. They didn't have all the traditional things the aircraft have that need to make them fly, like ailerons, flaps. They had nothing like that. It was just solid and smooth. It was. I looked for crew compartments, and there was none. It was also small. When I paced it off, it was, my pacing, it was about 9 feet by 9 feet by 9 feet, probably about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. I couldn't really tell with with the earth and berm and the way it was. So I made my one walk around, and I was taking notes, and I decided to do the second one, and I went back around again. And then I noticed that there was glyphs written on the side of the craft itself. And these are the glyphs. You can see them there. Can you see those okay? Yeah, those glyphs were on there. And so I recorded those down. The skin of the craft was smooth, but when I got to where the glyphs were, on the bottom there, I was running my hand. They felt like it was going from very smooth, like, even though it was metal, it was glass-like as far as smoothness. I went from that smoothness to it felt like maybe sandpaper, where those glyphs were on there, like they're etched in there. So I recorded all that stuff, went back around, did it again. I was fascinated by the glyphs. There's nothing, it seemed inert at that point. It wasn't doing anything. I figured I had a lot of time on the ground. I had all kinds of time until the response forces got there. So I did take my time then, and I went back around, looked at the glyphs again, and there was a large one I showed you above the other glyphs with a triangle and two smaller ones at the top, circles, and one at the bottom. And I felt compelled to touch that. So I touched it. And when I did, I had a blinding white light. I couldn't see nothing. And during that exchange, that white light, all I could see is zeros and ones and stuff like that flying around. It was crazy. And I was pretty freaked out. Once I took my hand off, it stopped immediately. And the thing is, it wasn't light. I can tell you that right now for a fact, because I had my night vision. With that kind of bright light, I wouldn't have night vision, and the forest was dark, and I had my night vision. So it was some kind of technology of some sort. I did not touch the craft after that. That was the last time. There's no way I was going to touch that again. And when I went back around on the other side, I started getting color movement with it, and it started to generate that color movement. And then also this bright light was starting. So I got back on the ground trying to take a defensive position with it. I wasn't sure if I activated something that was going to explode or what. I didn't know. And it moved up, sort of moved back through the trees a little bit, which they can't because the trees are too close together, and it was at least 9 feet. Okay, so it did that. And then I went up to the canopy of the forest where there was just one opening where we were at, and that's where the canopy was. I went up to the top. It momentarily just sort of stayed there, turned to the right, and was gone in a blink of an eye. And that's when I heard my other airman that was over here, and he was like saying, "Look at that!" I don't know if he says, "Look at that! Look at that!" And you couldn't see nothing else now because the forest is black. I mean, you can't see nothing else. I mean, once that left, it was pretty dark. So I didn't know what he was looking at. So we pursued after it, went over a couple of fences, went through some other stuff, get to where the farmhouses were, and I see it again over Capel Drain. It's just momentary, just staying there, and it took back off slowly. I mean, slowly, like 300-400 miles an hour toward the North Sea, and that was the last time I seen it. That's the incident, and that is really with a lot of brevity. Okay.
So if we just go back to that moment in the forest, you were not alone, right? I mean, you were the only one that went up to the ship and touched the ship, but you had a couple of other people with you who were outside of what you describe in your book as some sort of a force field. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, you're talking about the sphere of influence. That's what I call it. Because within about 10 feet of that craft, I guess I will have to go into the part about what I felt and things were wrong. I was feeling like static electricity and stuff. That was outside of that 10-foot area, that sphere of influence. But when I got inside there, or close to it, my movements, like walking, were labored. Like, in a way, I'll use a comparison. It would be like walking waist high to a pool of water. You know how you would be struggling to walk. That's how I felt walking up toward it. So that was the initial feeling, and of course I'm looking around, and it's hard to see outside this glowing area I'm in, but I could see the other airmen over there standing just still, not moving. And I seen Kabanzak over at the end control point where he was not moving. So I didn't know at the time. I thought they might have been just scared or something like that, frozen. But I think that the feeling I had was it was like it wasn't the same I wasn't in the same time or dimension, or was it? I guess I don't know the correct words to use. I worked really hard in the book to describe this, use the correct words. But it felt like that it was like catching up. This area around was out of sync. Okay, it wasn't in the same sync as outside of the sphere of influence. Okay, you want to go farther?
Well, I mean, it's a lot to take in, you know, because I mean, obviously, I believe that you had the experience, but for the average person who's listening to this, you know, it raises a lot of questions around, well, what was that sphere? What is that energy? Where did it come from? And I'm sure there are questions on everybody's mind, right?
Including mine.
Exactly.
I have the same, yeah, and you know, I have all the same questions, and that's another thing. It just makes it just more perplexing. Because it went against my complete train of thought I've ever had. Any training, it went completely against everything I've known. I mean, everything. And so it was really hard to comprehend. I mean, yeah, it was very hard to comprehend. And I can understand why somebody would have doubts about it. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't believe anything I said, honestly. I mean, it's so bizarre. But yeah, it's just so bizarre. And
what kind of defies the laws of known physics, right? I mean, well, I mean, and there's other elements in that experience as well. Like, for example, in the book, you mentioned that this craft had these, it was like it was standing on beams of light, like non-physical beams of light, and that seemed to be its sort of landing pad, or however you want to call it. Which again, we don't have that technology. In fact, I was reading an article just very, very recently the other day that now, you know, some scientists have taken E = mc squared, and they've tried to reverse engineer to create matter from light. And this is something that was hypothesized back in the 1930s, and only now the experiments starting to show it. And there's this craft that's actually using light as matter, which is a technology that we don't currently have even now. So so that in and of itself is just a little bit mind-blowing.
Yeah, you know, they had the technology, it is. And the other thing is, they left impressions in the ground. So
yeah,
that, which is, and even when the team from Langley came out, you know, the aftermath, you know, a few days later, they with the air temperature and that, they tried to figure out how much it weighed by how deep the impressions were, and that kind of stuff they did. And they estimated it was 7 tons, which is extremely light for an aircraft. Okay, it is very light aircraft, and but 7 tons, that's, you know, so that's a lot of. It's not, you know, that's like having 2 or 3 cars out there. You know what I mean? That's pretty heavy.
Yeah,
but not for an aircraft. Yeah, the technology is. Well, there's other things with the technology. I mean, one is it didn't have no sound when it took off. It didn't have no air displacement. I mean, how's that working? The craft had no intake. They didn't have no exhaust. I mean, how does that work? You know, those kind of things. There's just a lot of things that today all the aircraft got to have those things. They have to have them.
That's just the laws of thermodynamics and motion and physics, right? I mean,
and the other thing, it had no sonic boom. How do you get around a sonic boom? I mean, like going on a blink of an eye, it wasn't disappeared. It was that fast. I mean, a blink of an eye, that's fast. And there was no sound. I mean, how do you get away from a sonic boom? I mean, they say that they're working on that too. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far into, you know, trying to get proof around all of this, because I personally am a believer. I've had contact myself, so I'm not the one that needs convincing here. What I am more interested in is the reason behind why these contacts are happening. And a big part of what we're doing here is we are just setting frameworks and conversations to potentially lead humanity towards that initial open contact. And so the most exciting part for me about your case is actually the code that you receive. So you put your hand on this craft, it's got these symbols on it, which again, I mean, some may liken it to, it's not quite sacred geometry, but kind of has that similar kind of, I guess, characteristic about it, where you've touched this symbol and you've received this download or this piece of information, right? And at the time, did you have an awareness of the message, or was that something that became decoded a lot later on down the track?
It was decoded way down the track, but one of the things after it was decoded, I always had impressions, what I felt like from the time that, and those things materialized in the code eventually. So they were there. So I guess there was some kind of unknown knowledge that was, awareness, I guess. But as far as the proof with it, making a proof positive is Gary Osborne. His research, I mean, he's challenged anybody in the world to disprove him. Go for it. I mean, that's how positive he is. So I mean, the thing, like Gary says, the math does not lie. You can't dispute the math with it.
Well,
and what he found a code within, he found a code within a code. That's the thing.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about it was given in binary, which is a language we actually understand. I mean, if it was given in some sort of random symbols, you'd be like, well, what is this? But we actually know binary code. That's something that exists, right?
Well, in binary and English, and it did a lot of nice things for us. The craft had markings, like we mark our aircraft. Why would it have markings on it? There's all kinds of things that felt human about it. You know what I mean? But a very advanced, maybe AI type human. I don't know. But there was communication. That happened because I couldn't go to sleep when I went home, and I finally was compelled to write all those ones and zeros down. I did it, and I just put the book away. And I was doing a documentary in Phoenix back in 2010, and I was with one of the other witnesses and another ufology person, Howell, and they asked me a question about a date or time, and I was looking back through my notebook, and I had all that stuff in the back of my notebook because that's the only paper I had at the time when I wrote. And I flipped it open, and they said, "Whoa, what's that?" I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna have to explain this," because to me, the episode with the binary was just traumatic. I was from the trauma maybe of the event. I was like close to losing it. And I thought I wasn't being able to cope with what was going on, and so I was pretty embarrassed by it. So I just never told anybody about it. Just but it did come out in a hypnosis session I did in '94 after I retired from the Air Force. I was having a sleep disorder, and I was only sleeping a couple hours a night. And I went to my medical doctor, and she said, "All I can do is give you medicine." And I said, "I don't want that stuff." I said, "I have a high pressure job." And she said, "Well, how about if would you be willing to go to a psychiatrist and see what they can do?" I said, "Sure, anything, so I can sleep. Anything with taking meds." And anyway, I went to one for about a month, and like once a week. And she says, "Would you be open to a hypnosis?"
Mm.
I says, "What?" She says, "Something happened in your past, in your childhood, or something." Oh, never thought of that kind of stuff. I said, "Sure." I said, "If you think it might help." And at the time, her notes, she taped the sessions. That was the way that she did her notes, like an 8mm or something like that. And so she did the first session. I tell you what, when I came out of the hypnosis, man, I felt great. Okay, I felt rested. I felt perfect. It was nice. But then I look over to the doctor, and she's got her jaw on the table, and I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "We're going to have another session," she says, "and we're going to have to talk about Woodbridge." I go, "Oh no." In a way, I was relieved it wasn't some kind of thing happened to me when I was a child or something, But it turned out to be Woodbridge. I went, okay, so that's how that came out. But during that hypnosis session, the second one, in there it talks about binary, and I never knew what the hell that meant. Okay, I didn't know what it meant, and that was back in '94. And the neat thing is after she did fix the problem with the sleeping. By the way, she gave me some kind of alpha blocker, some stuff, and it worked. But she says, "Do you want?" He says, if you want, so you can have my notes, my tapes." So she gave me the tapes, so I had those too. By the way, when I wrote the book, that helped a lot too. So yeah,
that's incredible. So, what is the message? Is this something that can be easily summarized in a few sentences, or what are we talking here?
I just talked to Gary on it last week. What it's doing for some reason, and I'm talking down to the inch globally, it has identified a secret chamber in Giza, and it has.
Sorry, a secret chamber where?
Giza?
Oh, in the pyramids.
Yeah, it's on the plateau of Giza. And these sites are all related, by the way, according to Gary. And it also shows he believes he's found Atlantis. So it has shown us that. So.
Sorry, can you say that again? What has he shown?
He says it has shown where Atlantis was.
Atlantis?
And, yes. And that was one of the things that is showing it. Yeah, and I'm sitting there watching, and I sent you the, I sent you the podcast for you to watch with Gary and Manu, this other professor, talking about this. And one of the things that the code does, you want to get back to, the more stable reality, is one of the things that it produces is they call a fine structured content, and that there is a 12-digit number that's within the universe.
Yeah.
That it means different things and stuff. As a matter of fact, Carl Sagan, I think, originally said that if we were ever going to have contact with a more intelligent, being, it would be done by the fine structured content would be in there, and they found the fine structured content in there, but it's from the 1980 date. It happened on the night. That's when they found that's when it was, the code was actually done. I'll let Gary talk about that because I think we're going to have to do a show with Gary. And I think that that would be a lot clearer. I don't want to steal any, what I really don't want to do is I don't want to misquote Gary on his research. Okay, it's just not right.
Yeah,
and I can do that very easily. One of the things is that this fine structured content wasn't. You couldn't identify it until 2018. That's when they actually came out with the programming to identify it. And there it was within the Rendlesham code.
Can you tell me more about that? Because I'm not exactly sure what you mean by this content.
I said there's a code within the code.
Yeah.
And what that does is through certain pronounced global coordinates that the code establishes, it shows the fine structure content. And Gary would have to explain that. I would love to be able to do that. It's not that I don't want to. I'm just not able to. Okay. And one of the things that's pretty interesting about the fine structure content is if it had 5 zeros behind this number, digits, that means it came from probably a pretty smart group of people. I mean, like maybe a class 2 civilization or something like that. But this has 12, which makes it impossible for any way for it to be a mistake. It makes it's absolute. Okay, and that is one of the steps that proves the the code being authentic, and it could never be written by anybody, devised by anybody on planet Earth at the time. I mean, or now, you just couldn't do it. I know it sounds confusing.
I feel like we need to chat with Gary about this, because I mean, I know a little bit about binary code in the sense that, you know, it's a series of ones and zeros, and you can translate those ones and zeros into alphabet, and then, you know, you got hexadecimal codes and things like that. So like I have some level of understanding around that. And I know that when you decode a binary code, you can get actual English letters that spell something out or say something. So when that code was decoded, I mean, was there a sentence, a phrase, like what actually came out of that? On the first layer of translation, before we get to the code within the code, what was that first level of translation?
The first one, yeah, it said, you know, eyes of your eyes. It said, it gave the date of origin. It gave the 6 coordinates around the world, globally, that many of them are ancient. I mean, some are just inaccessible, like one is off the coast of Ireland, you know, so it's in the water. So that you know, there's certain ones that are not accessible. But the ones from those, anyway, I say 6, there's actually 7, but one was repeated twice in the code, one at the beginning and at the end, and that was off the coast of Ireland. That was done twice.
Is that the Atlantis one?
No, that's actually the place where that mythical High Brazil, there, you know, it was there, High Brazil. And,
okay, right. Which one's the Atlantis one?
Oh, that's in San Miguel. That's in the Azores.
Okay. And you have exact coordinates for that?
Exactly.
And how, I mean, I'm sure there's a much bigger, you know, research behind this, but how did you come to the conclusion that that was Atlantis?
Gary will have to explain that. Okay, I'm not going to try because I listened. I had to listen to the podcast like 3 times. Okay, to get absorb it.
Okay.
I'm not a very good guest. I know as much about also binary as you do. Okay. That's the same amount. I don't know anymore. You know, my area of expertise is criminal justice. I mean, that's what I went to school for. I know nothing about binary. And they didn't have that stuff back in 1980. We didn't have cell phones, didn't have computers, didn't have nothing. You know.
Yeah. So you get this code years down the track, it gets translated, you see that it's a simple message with some coordinates, and then what? And
then I had another friend say, because I was having dreams with 23 and a half, 23, stuff like that. So I thought it was temperature gear, with temperatures and stuff like that. So this friend of mine says, I know a guy that might be able to help you on that. Maybe. I said, okay, who is it? Gary Osborne. I said, okay. So I got a hold of him on message, and then we did the Skype. And I says, what I want you to do is I want you to, you know, pretty much debunk this code, you know, just debunk it, you know, find out. And because I wanted him to, and I didn't want to influence him. So I gave him the first, I don't know what it's, I think I gave him the first 6 pages, and I gave him the rest. I think a total about 16, 17 pages. And so I left him alone with it. And it's been about 6, 7 months, and I write to him, I said, how are you coming with that code, the binary? He says, I thought that you weren't interested in that no more. I said, no, I don't want to influence you. That's why I'm leaving you alone. He says, well, thank you for that. He says, no, I just don't see nothing. And he said, I'm going to work on it. And maybe about a year later, and he comes back, and he says, I found something that's like really strange. It can't be a coincidence. And he started off with the first wow thing, okay? And he showed me, and I go, wow, how about that? And he goes, yeah, he said, that can't be a coincidence. And what we found, and what Gary found that each answer built, you had to have that answer to build on the next answer. They had to answer the next question. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you had to get the one answer to get the other thought is, well, what about this? And you had to have that answer to get the new one, this other answer. And they just built on each other. Okay. So after about 50 times of him contacting me with all coincidences, I said, yeah, right. They're not coincidences. I mean, they're all by design, obviously. And that's what started his research. And he did that from 2010, early 2011, right up to, well, he's doing it right now, but right up to 2019. And in May, we published the book in July 2019, and we're getting ready to go to print. And in May, Gary says, you got to hold off on the book. I said, why? He says, they just came out with the code, this program that will verifies the fine structure content in the code. Oh, wow, that's pretty deep, pretty heavy. It was so heavy, so important. In the epilogue of the Rendlesham Enigma book, which that is not a normal epilogue, it's 60 pages long. That is Gary's sole work on his discovery. And what it is designed for, it was designed to introduce the detailed book that he's writing, which is going to come out this year. So that's where he, how Gary came into with the binary.
Right. That's huge. I mean, so basically, if we're to summarize your experience, you were on duty one day, you went out into the bush, you saw a craft, it landed on the ground, you received a transmission that all these years, decades later, you've now discovered holds some very important information about ancient knowledge and wisdom relating to the pyramids, to Atlantis. I guess this is where it also crosses very much into like spirituality a little bit, or like kind of the, a little bit more of the mystery end of the spectrum. And I think that's where we can start to build those bridges between maybe what, other people have been saying and that lost spiritual knowledge, and perhaps what is inside this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, we've talked about this in a lot of detail, Gary and I and others. That's part of it. Also, part of it is interdimensional type travel. Okay.
Yep.
Time travel. That's what, or if you want to use a Hollywood term,
Time travel.
Yeah, well, that's Hollywood. It's interdimensional travel.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's got partly to do with that. And the other thing is, the actual code from 1980 has shown discoveries that happened only in 2018, 2019. And we, according to Gary, it's going to show other future things at Giza and other places. And the presentation he did that I heard is explains all of that. That's why it would be important to get him on one-on-one. I'll tell you right now, you're going to need an hour and a half with him, at least, maybe two. He does dumb it down for like people like me, where I can start understanding what he's saying. Okay, because otherwise, when he first put some of the work on, I said, I don't understand any of that stuff. And he says, well, I said, you got to dumb this stuff down, and he did. And wow, okay, that's fascinating. So the spirituality, there is a little bit of that going on, I guess, because there's a lot going on here with this code, okay, and that's only part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I'm thinking right now is how far down the rabbit hole do we want to go in this? Because so I do have a pretty solid understanding of the whole multidimensional space. But I guess, you know, trying to bridge together these types of experiences and then what I know from other schools of knowledge, I guess what's happening at the moment is, you know, we're trying to bridge those worlds together because there are people like yourself who've had very tangible experiences. You know, you weren't a believer, you didn't go looking for it, probably didn't even believe in UFOs at the time, right? And then you've had the
Right.
experience. Whereas there's other
That's right.
people out there who are
And
coming
you
from
got,
the other end.
you got to remember the only reason I was there, that I was doing an investigation. That's what I was there
Yeah.
for, to investigate aircraft crashes. I mean, I'm out for nothing else. No, I didn't believe in any type of things like UFOs and all that stuff before. But I tell you what, I had a different viewpoint when I walked out of that fort.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't. This is not lights in the sky. This is not stuff like, you know, people don't know what the hell they're looking at. I mean, that's usually 99% of what people report. But
Yeah.
no, this is a object that landed, stayed on the ground for about 45 minutes, then took off. I mean, then when they went out to reinvestigate it with the teams on the morning of, Noel Nevels, he was a disaster preparedness guy. He had went out by base commander Colonel Conrad, told him to go out and check it out. He was out there all day with the lieutenant. They checked out the landing site. They did all kinds of readings and stuff, you know. And he came back in around 7 or 8 o'clock that night on the following day to the officers club. He got a hold of Colonel Conrad. He says, and Colonel Conrad asked him, he says, what do you think? Does this warrant more investigation? He says, absolutely. And that's when they went back out, and that's when Colonel Hall jumped on, and they went out with something like 30 people. The other thing about Rendlesham is it's not just me seeing stuff. This is a mass sighting. I mean, we had people from different vantage points that were working at Bentwaters and working at Woodbridge, and they watched, like the guys Bertolino, he was working at Bentwaters and he watched it land. See, I never did see it land, but he watched it land. I mean, he was like freaked out. What the hell's that, you know? So, you know, everybody had that type of thing. And the other thing is the government shut us down like within about 24 hours, 48 hours. They said, treat this as classified, top secret. And then they put a cover story out, which you probably can read about in other books. It's probably out there. And that's where a lot of the disinformation comes from, because the whole purpose is to, well, if I talk, who's going to believe me? If somebody else is saying a different story, or this person's saying different, that's how they go ahead and do the containment. But the containment fell apart with the because I was going to leave that for out, but during the hypnosis session, the reason I had to come back for a second hypnosis session with her is that I had a block. Whatever it was, I was going from the craft. I would be down OSI building, the investigators, and then I'd be back there. And she said, I don't understand why you keep popping back there. And of course, I had a metal cue that when she started talking or asking questions about it, I got this metal cue from it that tried to mask it, and it made no sense at all. It was a nursery rhyme I heard, which apparently is common to do with that if we're trying to block your memory, I guess. I don't know. It's disturbing. And she broke that block, and what the block was the binary code. That was the only thing they wanted to make sure that it didn't get out, was the binary code. But their Achilles heel, when
you say they, who are we talking about here? Who wanted to block the binary?
Government, U.S. government intelligence, and
so the U.S. government actually did something to you to block that memory of the code.
Yeah, right. And OSI works for the State Department overseas. So
how did they do that?
Sodium pentothal. They put you under and they do it. That's all I know. I mean, I only go by what's on the hypnosis tape by watching it. You know, I go through it, you know. And what was I saying? This part about the
When did that happen? So you had the experience. Obviously, there was some sort of debrief that happened afterwards. They come out and say to you that this is classified, don't talk about it. And at what point did they insert that block?
oh, that's when I went down to the OSI bill, and that was like within 48 hours. And
What method did they use to do that?
I have no memory of it, but on the hypnosis tape, it was drug induced. So I had to give them
They gave
permission,
you
but I can't
something,
remember.
you ate something, you drank something, they injected
They
you.
injected in my arm. No, they gave me an injection in this arm. No, it wasn't nothing. It was obvious. And anyway, when that got blocked by this doctor in '94, when she found the block and she unblocked it, you know, I remembered the binary, and that's the other thing. That's when I wanted to make sure I went looking for my notebook where I wrote all that stuff down about the code and stuff, you know, because they were talking about that for some reason, and I didn't call it binary, and I call it ones and zeros, all right. And I want to know, I said, I had those ones and zeros written down. I said, so after the discovery of them in 2010, you know, and I'm talking to Gary and other people about it, and I says, you know, that's their Achilles heel. They never knew that that damn notebook existed. That's their problem. They didn't have no, you know, it's look at it this way. If I didn't have the notebook and I didn't write it down, you know, I don't know if I could, you know, the code probably wouldn't be, you know, present today. You know, that's what I'm thinking.
But you did write it down, and at some point, I believe people tried to steal the notebook, right?
The plaster cast, they stole that. And that was when my household goods were being shipped from England to back to the States. Normally takes 6 weeks. I still didn't have my stuff for 7 months. I mean, it took a while.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, I did that. They just weren't aware of the notebook being written down. And you know, and the other thing is, they said, "Well, that notebook, well, you know, I was under pressure to get it authenticated." Okay, it's fine with me. So I had an authentication expert out in Los Angeles, uh, Robert Wood, authenticated. Yeah, he says, you know, the paper, the ink. He said the deterioration of the ink. He said this is written in December or winter of 1980. So you know, you put that out, and so that was the only authentication I had until Gary Osborne. And what Gary's discovery, his authentication of the notebook actually makes me irrelevant right now. You know, I'm just the bearer of information like this or writing it down. You know, I'm just not important with, you know, not anymore.
It's a pretty life-changing experience. I mean, even if you are just a messenger, you know, for this piece of information to have the experience and you know, tell the story about it, I think that in and of itself has a pretty profound impact on you. I did read in your book that it wasn't always positive as well, that there were very traumatic elements to what you experienced. I'm very sorry you had to go through that. But I think it's, you know, look, call me a little bit of a, you know, mystic, but like I believe that everything does happen for a reason, and that people are specifically chosen to have these experiences. And as I was reading your book, particularly the bits about Burroughs just being oblivious, you know, like here you are inside this, what you call this field of influence, he's on the outside and he's got no idea what's going on. So you obviously, you know, for some reason have been able to have this experience willingly, because if these beings didn't want you to have the experience, you wouldn't be having the experience. So I think there's something to be said for that.
I think, yeah, I think I would have preferred not seeing anything. I mean, I'd rather be the person. See, the thing is now with Burroughs is that he didn't. everything was instantaneous for him. Oh, that's a major point with that sphere of influence.
Yeah, the
Because
time.
what was going on at the time difference. I mean, that's in the book. I didn't go into that, but that's a lot of information about that alone. Yeah, that's one of the things. And the other thing is, in that sphere, when I was in there, I had a analog watch, and so I get back to Central Security Control that morning after the incident's over. I'm getting write my after action report, and my watch is 45 minutes off.
Mm-hmm.
So with the control centers, it was 45 minutes. How that happened? Because we don't wear cheap watches in the military. I'll tell you that. We wear expensive watches, and that was one of the things. So when I had a time, my time actually froze or whatever out there. I don't know if it did or not. I'm assuming that's what happened. Who knows? I don't know. And so there was the 45 minutes difference. And of course, Burroughs never wore a watch, so that would have been interesting if he did. Yeah, it's quite remarkable, the whole situation. I knew at the time though that I knew that this wasn't anything that we had on the our research and development boards or nothing like that. The United States, it definitely wasn't Russia or Soviet, because Soviets they had nothing very good at all back then, and the Chinese, it definitely wasn't them. They didn't have no technology at all back then. So it wasn't us. That means it had to be something else. So the research that Gary's doing now leaves that much. It's got to do with causality. Something else. I really don't want to get into it with it because I'm going to misquote Gary. I don't want to do that.
It'll be really great to actually do a follow-up episode with both of you on, so that he can explain bits of the story and go through the code. Look, I'm sure we could talk about this for many more hours, but I think we need to wrap up this episode today. So thank you so much, Jim, for being so generous with your time and for sharing your story. It's probably one of the wildest experiences I've heard of. I think, even just everything that's in the book it's so detailed. It's so difficult to disprove the experience because of how much evidence there is to back it. And I think, if anything, sharing experiences like this, I think, takes humanity closer towards asking those questions and even preparing for this idea that we're not alone in the universe, and that this open contact, I mean, it's really just a matter of time, right? Before we get out there and say, hang on, guys, there's something else out there. Let's stop hiding the truth from people and just be open about what actually exists in the nature of our existence in the universe. That's huge.
I think the truth is going to surprise a lot of people. Yeah,
it's phenomenal. Thank you so much, Jim, for your time today, and for everyone who's tuning in. Please definitely get a copy of the book if you're interested in going deeper into the phenomenon, and we'll definitely have to get Jim and Gary back on for another episode, so stay tuned for the next one. All right, thanks everyone. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to First Contact. I'm your host Eesha Patel, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about open contact with extraterrestrial beings. Come join me in the Facebook community where you can continue the discussion, or keep listening for another episode of First Contact.